Sarah Martinez adjusted her shooting stance for what felt like the 100th time that morning. The desert wind whipped across the outdoor firing range in 29 Palms, California, carrying with it the familiar scent of gunpowder and hot sand. She had been coming here every weekend for the past 6 months, ever since her medical discharge from the Marines. The repetitive crack of gunfire and the satisfying ping of bullets hitting targets had become her therapy. At 32, Sarah looked nothing like the decorated Marine Corps sniper she had once been. Gone was the confident bearing and razor-sharp focus that had earned her the respect of her fellow Marines in Afghanistan. Now, she struggled with trembling hands and sleepless nights, the invisible wounds of war taking their toll. The doctors called it PTSD, but to Sarah, it felt like she had lost herself somewhere in the mountains of Helmand province. The range officer called for a ceasefire, and Sarah lowered her rifle. She had been using her personal AR-15, the civilian version of the M4 she had carried in combat. It felt familiar yet foreign in her hands, like greeting an old friend who had changed while you were away. She removed her ear protection and walked to check her target, her slight limp barely noticeable to casual observers. The grouping was tight, all shots within a 2-inch circle at 300 yards. It was good shooting by any standard, but Sarah frowned. 6 months ago, she could have put every round through the same hole at this distance. The steady hands that had once made her one of the Corps' most effective snipers now betrayed her when she needed them most. "Nice shooting," came a voice behind her. Sarah turned to see a man in his 40s, tall and lean, with the unmistakable bearing of a career military officer. He wore civilian clothes, khaki pants, and a polo shirt, but everything about his posture screamed special operations. His eyes were sharp and calculating, the kind that missed nothing. "Thanks," Sarah replied curtly, not in the mood for conversation. She had learned that most people at the range either wanted to show off their own marksmanship or quiz her about being a female shooter. Neither held much interest for her these days. The man didn't take the hint. "Mind if I ask what unit you served with? That's some serious precision shooting." Sarah hesitated. She had learned to be cautious about revealing her military background. Too many people either treated her like a curiosity or thanked her for her service in ways that made her uncomfortable. "Marines," she said finally. "Infantry? Sniper." The word came out harder than she intended. The man nodded slowly, his expression shifting to something Sarah couldn't quite read. "Afghanistan?" "2 tours." Sarah turned back to her target, hoping to end the conversation. She had learned that talking about her deployments inevitably led to questions she didn't want to answer. "I did 3 tours there myself," the man said quietly. "Navy." Something in his tone made Sarah look at him more carefully. There was a weight to his words, the kind that came from shared experience. "What part of Afghanistan?" "All over. Mostly eastern provinces." "You?" "Helmand, Fob de Laram, and some places that didn't have names." The man extended his hand. "Commander Jake Morrison, Naval Special Warfare." Sarah shook his hand, noting the firm grip and the calluses that spoke of years handling weapons and climbing ropes. "Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, Marine Corps Scout Sniper." Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. "Martinez, I heard about you. You're the sniper who saved that convoy near Musa Kala." Sarah's jaw tightened. She had hoped that story hadn't followed her into civilian life. "I did my job. 18 confirmed kills in a single engagement. Held off an entire Taliban company for 4 hours while a medevac extracted wounded Marines." Morrison's voice carried the respect of one professional warrior for another. "That wasn't just doing your job. That was extraordinary." Sarah looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. The medals and commendations meant nothing when weighed against the faces that haunted her sleep. A lot of good Marines didn't make it home, but a lot did, because of what you did that day. The two stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching other shooters work their way through their targets. Sarah found herself studying Morrison more carefully. There was something about him that reminded her of her old squad leaders, men who had seen too much, but still carried themselves with quiet dignity. "What brings a Navy commander to a Marine-based shooting range?" she asked. Morrison smiled for the first time since they had started talking. "I run a training program for special operations units. We use this range sometimes for long-distance shooting courses. Today, I'm just here for personal practice." "What kind of training program?" "Advanced marksmanship and tactics. We work with all branches: SEALs, Rangers, Force Recon, Delta. The best of the best come through our program." Sarah felt a flicker of her old interest. In the Marines, she had always been eager to learn new techniques and improve her skills. "Sounds challenging." "It is. We're always looking for qualified instructors, especially those with real combat experience." Morrison paused, studying Sarah's face. "Someone with your background and skills would be invaluable." The offer hung in the air between them like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. Sarah felt a mix of excitement and fear. Part of her desperately wanted to get back into the world she had lost, but another part was terrified of discovering that she was no longer the Marine she had once been. "I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that," she said honestly. Morrison nodded. "I understand. The transition to civilian life is never easy, especially for those of us who've seen combat. But sometimes, the best way forward is to find a new mission." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. "My offer stands. If you ever decide you want to explore it, give me a call." Sarah took the card, noting the official Department of Defense seal and Morrison's title, Director, Advanced Combat Training Center. What exactly would an instructor do? Teach the next generation of warriors how to stay alive. Share the hard-won knowledge that comes from real experience. Help ensure that the mistakes of the past aren't repeated. The idea was appealing, but Sarah's confidence had taken a beating along with her body. "I'm not the sniper I used to be." Morrison glanced at her target, still hanging 300 yards downrange. "Maybe not. But you're something potentially more valuable, a survivor who learned from the experience. That's worth more than perfect shot placement." A loud whistle interrupted their conversation as the range officer called for the next firing sequence. Morrison checked his watch and frowned. "I need to head out," he said. "But I meant what I said about the position. We need people like you, Sarah. People who understand that marksmanship isn't just about hitting targets. It's about bringing everyone home." Sarah watched him walk away, his words echoing in her mind. For months, she had felt adrift, unable to find her place in a world that seemed foreign after years of military structure and purpose. The idea of returning to something resembling her old life was both terrifying and exhilarating. She looked down at the business card in her hand, then back at her target. The grouping was still tight, still deadly, accurate by any reasonable standard. Maybe Morrison was right. Maybe she didn't need to be perfect to be valuable. The afternoon sun was beginning to set as Sarah packed up her gear. Other shooters were finishing their sessions, the range gradually growing quieter. She had always enjoyed this time of day, when the light took on a golden quality that reminded her of some of the more peaceful moments during her deployments. As she loaded her rifle case into the back of her pickup truck, Sarah found herself thinking about Morrison's words. A new mission. The phrase resonated with her in a way that surprised her. For months, she had been drifting without purpose, going through the motions of civilian life without feeling truly connected to anything. Maybe it was time to stop running from her past and start using it to build something meaningful. Maybe the skills and experience that haunted her dreams could be transformed into something that honored the memory of those she had lost. Sarah pulled out her phone and stared at Morrison's business card. The numbers seemed to blur slightly as her hands trembled, a reminder of how far she had fallen from her peak performance. But for the first time in months, she felt something stirring inside her that resembled hope. She wasn't ready to make the call yet. There were still too many questions, too many fears about whether she could handle returning to a military environment. But the seed had been planted, and she could feel it beginning to take root. The drive home took her through the small town of 29 Palms, past the familiar signs of military life. Young Marines heading to the base, families dealing with the unique challenges of military service, businesses that had grown up around the needs of the military community. It was a world she had once been part of, one that still felt like home despite everything that had happened. That night, Sarah sat on her small apartment's balcony, nursing a beer and watching the stars appear in the clear desert sky. The nightmares would come eventually. They always did. But for now, she allowed herself to imagine a different future. One where her experience meant something positive, where she could help others avoid the mistakes that had cost so many lives. Morrison's card sat on the table beside her, a tangible reminder that there might be a path forward she hadn't considered. The idea of teaching young warriors how to survive and thrive in combat was appealing in a way that surprised her. Maybe her pain and experience could be transformed into something that protected others. The desert wind picked up, rustling the few plants she kept on her balcony, and carrying with it the distant sound of aircraft from the nearby base. It was a sound that had once filled her with pride and purpose, and tonight, for the first time in months, it didn't make her feel like an outsider looking in. Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled to Morrison's contact information, her thumb hovering over the call button. Not tonight, she decided. But soon, when she was ready to take the first step toward reclaiming the warrior she had been and discovering who she might become. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's encounter with Commander Morrison at the shooting range. The business card had moved from her balcony table to her refrigerator, held in place by a magnet shaped like a Marine Corps emblem, a gift from her parents when she had first enlisted. Every morning, she saw it while making coffee. And every morning, she found a new reason to postpone making the call. The nightmares had gotten worse. Images of Musa Kala mixed with faces of Marines she had served with, creating a twisted landscape of guilt and survivor's remorse. Dr. Peterson, her VA therapist, said it was normal for trauma to resurface when major life decisions loomed. Sarah wasn't sure anything about her situation qualified as normal. On a Tuesday morning that started like any other, Sarah's phone rang while she was getting ready for her part-time job at a local sporting goods store. The caller ID showed an unknown number with a Virginia area code. Sarah Martinez? The voice was crisp and professional. Speaking. This is Commander Morrison. We met at the range a few weeks ago. Sarah's heart rate spiked. Yes, I remember. I hope you don't mind me calling directly. I got your number from the range sign-in sheet. Morrison's tone was casual but purposeful. I wanted to follow up on our conversation about the instructor position. Sarah sat heavily on her bed, phone pressed to her ear. I've been thinking about it. Good. I have a proposition for you. We're running a short course next week. Just 3 days. It's for a group of Marine Scout snipers heading to their first deployment. I could use an assistant instructor, someone who's been where they're going. The request hit Sarah like a physical blow. Teaching Marines heading to Afghanistan would mean confronting everything she had been trying to escape. I don't know if I'm the right person for that. You're exactly the right person, Morrison said firmly. These young Marines need to hear from someone who's walked the walk. Your experience at Musa Kala isn't just a story in their files. It's a lesson in survival that could save their lives. Sarah closed her eyes, seeing the faces of the Marines she had once served alongside. How many of them might still be alive if they had learned from someone with real combat experience? What would you need me to do? Share your knowledge. Talk about real-world applications of sniper tactics. Help them understand the difference between range shooting and combat shooting. Most importantly, help them learn to trust their training when everything goes to hell. The conversation lasted another 10 minutes, with Morrison outlining the basic structure of the course and answering Sarah's questions about logistics. By the time she hung up, she had agreed to spend the following week at the Marine Corps Mountain Warfare Training Center in Bridgeport, California. The drive to Bridgeport took Sarah through familiar terrain that stirred memories of her own training days. The high desert landscape reminded her of Afghanistan, and she found herself gripping the steering wheel tighter as familiar anxiety crept up her spine. By the time she reached the training center, her hands were shaking enough that she had to sit in her truck for 10 minutes before walking to the check-in building. Morrison met her at the administration office, and Sarah was struck again by his commanding presence. In the military environment, his authority was even more evident. Other Marines and sailors moved with obvious respect when he passed, and Sarah found herself automatically straightening her posture in response to his bearing. Glad you decided to come. Morrison said as they walked toward the barracks. Your quarters are in the instructor housing. The student Marines arrive tomorrow morning. Sarah nodded, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. How many students? 12. All Scout Sniper qualified, but none with combat experience. Average age is 22. Morrison stopped walking and turned to face her. They're good Marines, Sarah, but they're about to face something that no amount of training can fully prepare them for. Your job is to bridge that gap. That evening, Sarah reviewed the training materials Morrison had provided. The course covered advanced marksmanship, target acquisition in combat environments, and tactical decision-making under stress. On paper, it looked similar to the training she had received years earlier. But Sarah knew that the reality of combat was nothing like the scenarios described in training manuals. She spent most of the night awake, staring at the ceiling and wondering if she was making a mistake. The familiar weight of responsibility pressed down on her chest. But this time, it was mixed with something she hadn't felt in months: purpose. The next morning dawned clear and cold in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Sarah arrived at the training facility early, hoping to settle her nerves before the students arrived. She found Morrison already there, reviewing equipment with the other instructors. Morning, he said, looking up from a table covered with rifles and optical equipment. Ready for this? Sarah wasn't sure she would ever be ready, but she nodded anyway. As ready as I can be. The students arrived in an olive-green bus that reminded Sarah of her own arrival at sniper school years earlier. Watching them file out, she was struck by how young they looked. Had she ever been that young? The eager confidence in their faces was both inspiring and heartbreaking. They had no idea what they were about to face. Morrison called the group to attention and began introductions. When he reached Sarah, she felt 12 pairs of eyes studying her with curiosity and skepticism. Being a female sniper was still unusual enough to draw attention, and she could see the questions forming in their minds. Staff Sergeant Martinez completed 2 combat deployments to Afghanistan, Morrison said. She has 18 confirmed kills and was awarded the Silver Star for her actions at Musa Kuala. She's here to share practical combat experience that you won't get anywhere else. The skepticism in the students' eyes shifted to respectful attention. Sarah had mixed feelings about Morrison's introduction. The accolades were accurate but incomplete. They didn't mention the cost of those achievements, or the Marines who hadn't made it home. The first day focused on basic marksmanship principles and equipment familiarization. Sarah found herself naturally falling into an instructor role, correcting shooting positions and offering advice on breathing techniques. It felt surprisingly good to be useful again, to share knowledge that could make a difference. During lunch break, several students approached her with questions. Lance Corporal Jackson, a soft-spoken young man from Georgia, asked about the differences between training targets and human targets. The question caught Sarah off guard. It was the kind of thing you learned in combat, not something easily explained in a classroom. The biggest difference isn't physical, she said carefully. It's mental. When you're looking through your scope at someone who's trying to kill your friends, everything changes. Your heart rate spikes, your hands shake, and suddenly, that perfect shot you can make every time on the range becomes the most difficult thing you've ever attempted. The students listened intently as Sarah continued. The key is to train your body to respond automatically. When your mind is overwhelmed, muscle memory has to take over. That's why we drill the fundamentals until they become second nature. As the week progressed, Sarah found herself opening up more about her experiences. She talked about the importance of understanding ballistics in different environments, the challenges of shooting in extreme weather conditions, and the critical need for effective communication with spotters and ground units. On the third day, during a practical exercise, one of the students, Corporal Williams from Detroit, was struggling with long-range target identification. Sarah watched him through binoculars as he tried to distinguish between targets and non-targets at 800 yards. "I can't tell if that's a combatant or a civilian," Williams radioed back to the observation post. Sarah keyed her radio. "What does your gut tell you?" "I'm not sure. The figure is moving away from the compound, but I can't see any weapons." "Then you don't shoot," Sarah said firmly. In combat, you'll have split seconds to make these decisions, and you'll have to live with the consequences for the rest of your life. When in doubt, don't shoot. It's better to miss a legitimate target than to take an innocent life. The exercise continued, but Sarah could see the weight of her words settling on the students. This was the part of combat training that couldn't be simulated, the moral and psychological burden that came with taking human life. That evening, Morrison found Sarah sitting alone on a bench outside the barracks, staring up at the star-filled mountain sky. The altitude made the stars appear brighter and closer than they did in the desert. "You did good today," he said, settling onto the bench beside her. Sarah didn't respond immediately. The day had stirred up emotions she had been working hard to suppress. "I keep thinking about the Marines I served with who didn't make it home, wondering if they would have survived if they'd had better training." Morrison nodded slowly. "That's the burden of survival. But it's also why what you're doing here matters. Every piece of knowledge you share, every lesson you teach, could be the difference between life and death for one of these Marines. Some days, I wonder if I deserve to be the one who survived." "Survivor's guilt is normal," Morrison said. "But have you considered that maybe you survived for a reason? Maybe your experience is meant to help others." Sarah thought about the eager faces of the students, their trust in her knowledge and experience. For the first time in months, she felt like she might be exactly where she was supposed to be. The final day of the course included a comprehensive exercise that tested everything the students had learned. Sarah watched through spotting scopes as each Marine demonstrated their skills, offering encouragement and corrections via radio. Their improvement over the 3 days was remarkable. As the exercise concluded and the students began packing their gear, several of them approached Sarah to thank her personally. Lance Corporal Jackson shook her hand firmly and said, "Staff Sergeant, what you taught us about staying calm under pressure, I'm going to carry that with me." Corporal Williams, who had struggled with target identification, added, "The stuff about making ethical decisions in combat, that's going to save innocent lives. Thank you for being honest about how hard it really is." Watching the bus pull away with the students heading back to their units, Sarah felt a mix of emotions she hadn't experienced in months. Pride in the work she had done, satisfaction at seeing the students' progress, and something that might have been hope for her own future. Morrison walked over as she stood watching the bus disappear down the mountain road. "So, what do you think? Ready to do this full-time?" Sarah turned to face him, seeing genuine respect in his eyes. For the first time since her medical discharge, she felt like a Marine again. "I think I might be." "Good," Morrison smiled, "because I have another course starting next month. This one is for Navy SEALs transitioning to instructor roles. I could use someone with your experience and teaching ability." The offer represented everything Sarah had been afraid to hope for. A chance to rebuild her career, to find new purpose in her experience, and to honor the memory of the Marines she had served with by ensuring others were better prepared for the challenges ahead. As they walked back toward the administration building, Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. But this time, it didn't feel crushing. It felt like coming home. 8 months had passed since Sarah's first teaching assignment at Bridgeport. The Advanced Combat Training Center had become her new home, and she had found a rhythm that surprised her with its satisfaction. The nightmares still came, but less frequently now, and when they did, she could usually redirect the energy into preparing better training materials for her students. The morning sun cast long shadows across the 1,000-yard range at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado as Sarah prepared for her daily marksmanship practice. It was 0600, early enough that she could train without interruption before her students arrived. The Pacific breeze carried the salt smell of the ocean and the distant sounds of BUD/S training from across the base. She had been working with SEAL teams for 3 months now, and the experience had challenged her in ways she hadn't expected. While Marines were direct and straightforward in their approach to training, SEALs questioned everything, pushed boundaries, and demanded explanations that went beyond doctrine. They respected competence above all else, and Sarah had earned that respect through demonstration rather than rank or reputation. Today's practice session was particularly important. She was preparing for a demonstration that afternoon, a long-range precision shooting exhibition for a group of foreign military officers visiting the training center. Commander Morrison had specifically requested her for the demonstration, saying that her combination of combat experience and teaching ability made her the ideal representative. Sarah settled into her shooting position, checking her equipment one final time. The rifle was a custom .300 Winchester Magnum, purpose-built for extreme long-range work. The scope was military-grade, capable of resolving targets at distances that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. But all the equipment in the world meant nothing without the fundamentals she had learned through years of practice and combat application. The targets were set at various distances: 800, 1,000, and 1,200 yards. Sarah started with the closest target, using it to verify her zero and settle into her shooting rhythm. The first shot broke clean, and through her spotting scope she could see it had struck center mass. She worked her way methodically through each target, adjusting for wind and atmospheric conditions with each shot. As she prepared for her final shot at the 1,200-yard target, Sarah became aware that she was no longer alone on the range. A figure in desert camouflage utilities had appeared at the spotting position about 50 yards to her left. She couldn't see his face clearly, but his bearing suggested senior leadership. Sarah focused on her shot, controlling her breathing and trigger press with the precision that had taken years to develop. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder, and she watched through the scope as the bullet struck the distant target in the center ring. It was a shot that would have been difficult for anyone, but for Sarah, it represented the culmination of months of rebuilding her confidence and skills. She engaged the rifle's safety and sat up, removing her ear protection as she prepared to check her targets. The figure who had been watching approached, and Sarah recognized him as Captain Richardson, the commanding officer of the SEAL training detachment. She had worked with some of his men but had never interacted directly with him. "Outstanding shooting, Staff Sergeant," Richardson said as he approached. His voice carried the authority of command, but also genuine respect. "I've been watching you work with my SEALs. They speak very highly of your instruction." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, standing and shouldering her rifle. "They're exceptional students. They push me to be better at my job." Richardson nodded, studying her with the calculating gaze she had come to associate with senior special operations officers. "I understand you've had some significant impact on our training programs. Chief Petty Officer Morrison tells me your combat experience scenarios have been integrated into our standard curriculum." Sarah felt a flush of pride but kept her expression neutral. The scenarios she had developed were based on actual situations she had faced in Afghanistan, modified to provide training value without revealing classified details. Seeing them adopted by the SEAL community was validation that her experience had broader value. "I'm just sharing what I learned the hard way," Sarah said. "If it helps keep people alive, then it's worth doing." "More than worth doing," Richardson replied. "Chief Morrison also tells me you've been instrumental in developing our new ethics training module, the section on split-second decision-making in complex environments." The ethics training had been Sarah's idea, born from her own struggles with the moral weight of combat decisions. She had worked with a base chaplain and psychologist to create scenarios that force students to grapple with the kinds of choices they would face in real combat. Decisions that had no clear right answers, but had to be made. "Nonetheless, combat isn't just about marksmanship," Sarah said. "The hardest shots aren't always the ones requiring the most skill. Sometimes the hardest shot is the one you don't take." Richardson's expression grew more serious. "That's exactly the kind of wisdom these young operators need. Too many people focus on the technical aspects of our job without understanding the human cost." As they talked, Sarah noticed other personnel beginning to arrive for the morning training sessions. SEALs preparing for advanced marksmanship courses, Marines from the nearby base coming for cross-training, and civilian contractors setting up equipment for the afternoon demonstration. "Speaking of this afternoon," Richardson continued, "I understand you're providing the shooting demonstration for our international visitors. That's a significant responsibility." Sarah nodded, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves that came with high-visibility assignments. Commander Morrison felt I was the right choice for the mission. He was right, Richardson said firmly. But I want you to know that it's about more than just accurate shooting. These foreign officers need to see that American military training produces warriors who are both technically proficient and morally grounded. You represent both of those qualities. The weight of representation was something Sarah had struggled with throughout her career. Being a female sniper meant she was often seen as representing all women in combat roles. Now, as an instructor, she found herself representing the entire training program. It was a responsibility she took seriously, but sometimes found overwhelming. "I'll do my best, sir," Sarah said. "I know you will," Richardson replied. "That's why you're here." As the morning progressed, Sarah worked with her regular students, a class of 12 SEALs undergoing advanced sniper training. The group included experienced operators who had already deployed multiple times, and their questions often pushed Sarah to think beyond standard doctrine. Petty Officer First Class Davis, a sniper with 4 deployments under his belt, raised his hand during a discussion of urban combat techniques. "Staff Sergeant, how do you deal with the psychological pressure of making shots when civilians are in the area?" "I've been in situations where I had a clear shot at a high-value target, but there were kids playing nearby." The question hit close to home for Sarah, stirring memories of similar dilemmas she had faced in Afghanistan. "That's one of the hardest decisions you'll ever make," she said honestly. "There's no perfect answer. You have to weigh the immediate threat against the potential for collateral damage, consider the long-term consequences of action versus inaction, and make a choice you can live with." She paused, looking around the classroom at the serious faces of the students. "I can give you tactical guidelines and rules of engagement, but ultimately, you're going to have to trust your training, your moral compass, and your judgment. The important thing is to make a conscious decision rather than freezing up or acting on impulse." The discussion continued for another hour, covering scenarios that couldn't be simulated with targets and training aids. Sarah found herself drawing on experiences she had rarely talked about, sharing lessons that had been paid for with sleepless nights and moral wrestling matches. As lunch break approached, Sarah excused herself to prepare for the afternoon demonstration. She needed to check her equipment one more time and run through her planned shot sequence. The demonstration would include shots at various ranges, explanations of the techniques involved, and a question-and-answer session with the visiting officers. The international visitors arrived in a convoy of black SUVs, escorted by Marine Corps security personnel. Sarah watched from the preparation area as they disembarked. Officers from allied nations who were observing American training methods with an eye toward implementing similar programs in their own militaries. Commander Morrison approached as Sarah finished her final equipment check. "Ready for this?" "As ready as I can be," Sarah replied, securing her gear bag. "Any last-minute changes to the plan?" "None. Just be yourself and trust your abilities," Morrison said. "These officers have read your background briefing. They know what you've accomplished. Now they want to see American military training in action." The demonstration began with Sarah explaining the fundamentals of long-range precision shooting, using visual aids to illustrate concepts of ballistics, atmospheric effects, and equipment selection. The visiting officers listened intently, asking technical questions that showed their own expertise in military operations. "The key to successful long-range shooting," Sarah explained, "isn't just technical skill. It's the ability to make accurate assessments under stress, to account for multiple variables simultaneously, and to maintain ethical standards even when lives are at stake." She moved to the firing line, settling into her shooting position as the officers gathered at the observation area. The targets were set at 600, 800, and 1,000 yards, challenging but achievable distances that would demonstrate both skill and consistency. Sarah's first shot struck the 600-yard target in the center ring, and she could hear approving murmurs from the observers. She worked through each target systematically, explaining her process as she went and answering questions about technique and equipment. The final shot, at 1,000 yards, was intended to be the culminating demonstration. Sarah settled into her position, checked wind conditions one final time, and began her shooting sequence. As she pressed the trigger, a gust of wind picked up across the range, but her years of experience allowed her to compensate automatically. The bullet struck the target dead center, and spontaneous applause erupted from the observation area. Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction that had nothing to do with ego and everything to do with representing her profession and her country with excellence. As she secured her rifle and stood to face the observers, Sarah noticed a new figure at the edge of the group. A tall man in navy dress blue uniform, his chest decorated with ribbons that spoke of a distinguished career. Even at a distance, his bearing commanded attention. The question and answer session lasted another 30 minutes, with the visiting officers showing genuine interest in both the technical and ethical aspects of sniper training. Sarah found herself enjoying the intellectual challenge of explaining complex concepts to intelligent professionals from different military traditions. As the formal demonstration concluded and the visitors began to disperse, the figure in dress blues approached. Sarah recognized him now as Captain James Mitchell, the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Group 1. She had heard of him but had never interacted with him directly. "Staff Sergeant Martinez," Captain Mitchell said as he approached. "Exceptional demonstration. I've been following your work here at the training center." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, uncertain why such a senior officer would take personal interest in her work. "I've been reviewing the feedback from units that have gone through your training programs," Mitchell continued. "The after-action reports from deployed teams show a marked improvement in decision-making under stress and adherence to rules of engagement. Your influence is saving lives and preventing incidents that could have strategic implications." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the praise but also validated in a way she hadn't expected. To know that her training was having real-world impact on deployed forces was the greatest reward she could imagine. "More importantly," Mitchell added, "you've helped us train warriors who understand that true strength comes from knowing when not to shoot as much as knowing how to shoot. That's a lesson that goes far beyond marksmanship." As Captain Mitchell prepared to leave, he turned back to face Sarah one final time. In a movement that seemed to happen in slow motion, he brought his hand up in a perfect military salute, crisp, respectful, and held just long enough to convey deep appreciation. The salute was unexpected and profound, coming from a senior officer of Mitchell's stature. It represented recognition not just of Sarah's technical skills, but of her contributions to the warrior ethos of the special operations community. It was acknowledgement that her journey from wounded veteran to master instructor had produced something valuable and lasting. Sarah returned the salute with equal precision, feeling the weight of tradition and respect that the gesture carried. As Mitchell walked away, she remained at attention for a moment longer, absorbing the significance of the moment. Standing alone on the range as the afternoon sun began to set over the Pacific, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this point. The nightmares still came sometimes, and she still struggled with questions about purpose and worth. But today, in the simple gesture of a quiet salute, she had found something she had been searching for since her discharge from active duty. She had found her place in the warrior tradition, not as a combatant, but as someone who prepared others for the challenges she had faced. Her experiences, both triumphant and traumatic, had been transformed into something that protected and prepared the next generation of warriors. The range was empty now, except for Sarah and the distant sound of waves breaking against the Coronado shore. She shouldered her rifle and walked toward the parking area, feeling at peace with herself and her mission in a way she hadn't experienced since before her first deployment to Afghanistan. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, and new opportunities to share the hard-won lessons of combat experience. But tonight, Sarah Martinez was content to be exactly who and where she was. A Marine who had found her way home through service to others. The quiet salute had said more than any words could convey. It had recognized not just her skills as a marksman or her experience as a combat veteran, but her growth as a leader who understood that true warriors were made not just through training in violence, but through education in restraint, judgment, and moral courage. As she drove through the gates of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, Sarah carried with her the knowledge that her service continued, that her sacrifices had meaning, and that the Marines she had lost in Afghanistan would be honored through every life she helped save with her training and wisdom.